Welcome to the Daily Word. I'm Pastor Jennifer. We continue in our study of the Psalms over the Daily Word, and that's coming out of our worship series, Summer in the Psalms. If you've missed that, you can find those services online. Check them out. Last week we talked about lament, Psalms of lament, and how important those are in our human experience and our understanding of our faith. I want to talk with you about Psalm 22 today, one of the better known Psalms for us as Christians. It's the Psalm that Christ quoted when he was being crucified. You know those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? As you listen to this Psalm, I want you to hear three elements of Psalms of lament that are captured really well in Psalm 22. Listen for the description of suffering. In all Psalms of lament, you'll find this, and the idea is to describe the psalm as suffering so that you can get God's attention. And the second thing that you'll see is the psalmist asking for God to intervene, a powerful petition, knowing that the psalmist is not capable of saving themselves, but really waits for the Lord to act. And the third element of lament psalms that you'll listen for this morning as I read Psalm 22 is a motivation for God to act. The psalmist usually goes into detail, not just about the suffering. In Psalm 22, the psalmist proclaims that all of his suffering is happening because God has abandoned him. But you'll hear motivation for God to act, and that's felt when you see this urgent need out of the Psalm's description of the suffering. And you'll see that when you hear the psalmist here in 22 list the ways that previous generations have relied on God and found God to be trustworthy. And you'll also see that when the psalmist proclaims the ways that even from the very beginning of his life, God has been the source of strength and nourishment and sustenance. So let's dive in. Let's read Psalm 22. I'm reading from the Common English Bible, and so some of the words might sound a little different to you than what you're accustomed to. That's not a bad thing, because in some ways that helps us to hear familiar words afresh. So let's read this, and I'll pause a few times to explain something a little bit, and I'm glad that you're here. My God, why have you left me all alone? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my anguished groans? My God, I cry out during the day, but you don't answer. Even at nighttime I don't stop. You are the Holy One, enthroned. You are Israel's praise. Our ancestors trusted you. They trusted you, and you rescued them. They cried out to you, and they were saved. They trusted you, and they weren't ashamed. But I'm just a worm, less than human, insulted by one person, despised by another. All who see me make fun of me. They gape, shaking their heads. He committed himself to the Lord, so let God rescue him. Let God deliver him, because God likes him so much. Here again you see some echoes of the Passion story when Jesus is on the cross. But you are the one who pulled me from the womb, placing me safely at my mother's breasts. I was thrown on you from birth. You've been my God since I was in my mother's womb. Please don't be far from me, because trouble is near, and there's no one to help. Many bulls surround me. Mighty bulls from Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths at me like a lion ripping and roaring. I love this verse because of how descriptive and you can feel the psalmist's suffering and exhaustion. This is verse 14. I am poured out like water. All my bones have fallen apart. My heart is like wax. It melts inside me. My strength is dried up like a piece of broken pottery. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You set me down in the dirt of death. Dogs surround me. A pack of evil people circle me like a lion. Oh, my poor hands and feet. I can count all my bones. Meanwhile, they just stare at me, watching me. They divvy up my garments among themselves. They cast lots for my clothes. But you, Lord, don't be far away. You are my strength. Come quick and help me. Deliver me from the sword. Deliver my life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. Now, most scholars think that right here, smack dab in the middle of verse 21, there's a pause. Because we've just read, again, more petitions for God to intervene. And then in the second half of this verse, something shifts and something starts to happen. And what happens is God acts. From the horns of the wild oxen you have answered me. I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you in the very center of the congregation. All of you who revere the Lord, praise him. All of you who are Jacob's descendants, honor him. All of you who are Israel's offspring, stand in awe of him, because he didn't despise or detest the suffering of the one who suffered. He didn't hide his face from me. No, he listened when I cried out to him for help. I offer praise in the great congregation because of you. I will fulfill my promises in the presence of those who honor God. Let all those who are suffering eat and be full. Let all who seek the Lord praise him. I pray your hearts live forever. Every part of the earth will remember and come back to the Lord. Every family among all the nations will worship you. Because the right to rule belongs to the Lord. He rules all nations. Indeed, all the earth's powerful will worship him. All who are descending to the dust will kneel before him. My being also lives for him. Future descendants will serve him. Generations to come will be told about my Lord. They will proclaim God's righteousness to those not yet born, telling them what God has done. When that shift happens, we start hearing, instead of words of suffering and lament, we hear promises of restoration and hope. And there's sort of 4 parts to that restoration. You could call them movements. The psalmist goes from a sense of isolation to one of community, even saying he's back in the congregation. Those are good words for us to hear right now, I think. The psalmist moves from being preoccupied with themselves to being capable of contributing to the common good and being generous towards the common good. The psalmist moves from being self-concerned to being capable of praise and naming those things that God has done and will do. And finally, the psalmist moves from being focused on their own need to being in solidarity with the poor. Back in verse 24, the words that the psalmist says about fulfilling that vow of generosity are words that are good to hear for those who are suffering, those who have no food, those who are as hopeless as the psalmist was. So when we encounter this psalm, there are some scholars who think that, now remember, when we have the book of Psalms, they didn't come with numbers attached to them. They were just one psalm after another. We added the numbers as Bible editors somewhere along the human history. So there are scholars who wonder if Psalm 22 precedes Psalm 23 by happy accident, or if it was an intentional editorial choice. And I wonder what it would be like to always read Psalm 22 before Psalm 23. Now, Psalm 23 is, again, that one that we know best, right? It talks about God's faithful and loving regard towards us and care of us. If you're looking for a great book on the Psalms, I would recommend this one to you. It's Walter Brueggemann, From Whom No Secrets Are Hid. I want to close by reading a quote from here when he talks about this interplay between Psalm 22 and Psalm 23. Brueggemann says, when we take Psalm 23 by itself, as the churches want to do, it may claim far too quickly that all is well. Psalm 22 knows better than that. And I think at this point in our cultural history, we know better than that too. Psalm 22 knows that the darkness must be fully and deeply engaged. The reality of much of life is one of divine abandonment, of being in the valley without the protective staff, of being before enemies without a good table or a full cup. The miracle of it all is that Israel, and after Jesus the church, have found the stamina and the grounding to confess that in the abandonment, God can yet be trusted. So friends, as we explore these Psalms of lament, I wonder what your expressions of suffering, your cries for help from God might sound like. How would those be expressed? And I want to encourage you and offer a word of hope to you, that even in the midst of those laments that we all share communally and that you bear as an individual with a unique story, that even in the midst of that, God can still be trusted, and God is still with us, and God is working for good for us. So carry those words with you throughout the day and offer them to someone who needs to hear them. Blessings to you all, friends. Bye.